Good morning, everyone. I'm Kevin Allen, and I'm joined by my podcast partner, former Northern Michigan and NHL defenseman Tom Laidlaw, who played, of course, for the New York Rangers and Los Angeles Kings. And this is the Laidlaw and Allen Report. And obviously, Tom, still no hockey to discuss. But, you know, I read this morning about Team Canada has already said, we're not sending our athletes to the Olympics. This is, too dangerous of situation. And everyone is sort of lobbying Japan to cancel the Olympics. And it got me thinking, are we just being naive to think that there's the possibility that we're going to play NHL games, playoff or otherwise, this season, or do you think there's still a possibility that we could, get this done?
Well, I think when they first made the decision to not cancel it, just postpone the season, based on the information they had, it seemed like that even watching the politicians and how they reacted with things, that was the right decision, that, this could pass by in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever, and then we're back at it. But it just seems like now, the further we get into this thing, it seems the more likely this is long term. You hear some people that say like we're all locked in our houses here, we could be here for another 12 weeks before we're really going out. And if that's the case, then I think the NHL, I think all those seasons are canceled. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, we've got National Guard troops now being called up, and we've got hoarding at the grocery stores, and of course, all of our 401ks have just been devastated. I'm just not sure that we'll be able to at any point, suddenly just kind of reverse course and suddenly say, okay, it's time to play hockey. I think we all kind of want that. I think we all need the diversion. There's no doubt about it. I mean, isn't it strange, Tom? I just find it, that usually every night, no matter what else I'm doing, I'm checking to see kind of what's happened in sports. And of course, nothing is happening in sports. Yeah. It's just the oddest thing. And the way we are, the American sports or North American sports is set up is that, we have one sport going on and then another one starting up. So we always have overlapping sports. So it's sometimes, you got 2 or 3 options to watch, and we have our annual events like March Madness, and there are people who don't care anything about auto racing, but we watch the Indy 500 because it's kind of a tradition. Nobody cares about horse racing, but yet we'll watch the Kentucky Derby. Tennis fans, some watch no tennis whatsoever, but when Wimbledon's on, strawberries and cream and breakfast from Wimbledon, they watch it. So it's just so much a part of the landscape. And I think we're all kind of having withdrawal a little bit. I just see on Facebook people not knowing quite what to do with themselves.
Yeah, it's kind of sad, right? It's, you're right. I think we get so used to just things being the same way all the time for us. We just count on those things being there, and all of a sudden it's gone. And then you start to think to yourself too, okay, what are, and we touched on this last week, I think, what's the long-term ramifications? I was talking to a gentleman in the sports franchise business, and he was talking about how, there's, none of these teams are going to be sold now because they just don't know what the revenues are going to be. How much revenue are they going to lose from, ticket sales and sponsorship and everything? So, again, that's not our important issue right now. Obviously, there's the health issue is the most important thing, but you start thinking long term. Some of the predictions that are being made for our economy and how that's going to affect the sports world. It's that unknown, right? But again, you know what? Although we say this, I don't know how you are, but I remember after 9/11, as terrible as that was, a lot of us thought, well, geez, things are really going to change now. But after a while, we went right back to living our life again. I mean, we have to take our shoes off at the airport and all those kinds of things. But, we went right back to our life as usual, really.
Yeah, but I think this is different because that threat was there and it was real, but there was a sense that we could sort of conquer it. There was more, we had a lot of confidence in the ability of America to, go take care of business. And now we just don't know. I mean, we don't, just because we don't know, there's no answers to this. Like, you can't just go and go to Afghanistan and go after the Taliban. We don't know how to get at the Taliban in this situation, or the version of the virus. I wonder too, and I as a former athlete, maybe you can sort of address this a little bit. When you're a professional athlete, I mean, and this goes beyond the economics of it all. Obviously, athletes make a lot more money than the average person, but they also live in just a very unique world. They live in a world where they go out and have lunch somewhere, and people will recognize them, and they live a completely different kind of lifestyle. But when things like this happen, they get to all have the same issues that we all have. They're going to the grocery store and can't find the toilet paper.
Yep.
They're worried about their grandmother. They got a lot going on. And I wonder, do you think that, with all this going on, that athletes kind of sort of take stock of their lives? And, I saw on this a very good story, and I think this is probably consistent with what you would see with athletes. I've seen several athletes make, public service announcements and telling everyone to make sure that they're social distancing. I saw former NHL player Stu Grimson, who's been on this program, was involved just recently, when they had the tornadoes in Nashville, got out and helped and got that organized. But during all this, I think you see athletes trying to do their best to help. But what do you think they're thinking as they kind of go through this about, their life and the way they live normally?
That's a fantastic question, because I remember for me, even just retiring, and I knew my retirement was coming up. I'd had a bad back. I missed a bunch of time. So I knew that my career was coming to an end. But when I finally had to go up, it was Rogie Vachon out in Los Angeles, went up to his office at the Great Western Forum. And it was at the end of training camp. I tried to come back. It wasn't working. And we finally sat down and said, that's it. I remember leaving the building. Like, it wasn't fear. It was just like kind of a disbelief that I no longer was going to be part of a team or playing hockey anymore. That was going to be it for me, because I was 33, 34 years old. I played hockey all my life. I'd always been on a team. I'd always had that pattern where kind of goes to what you're saying. So I'd always had the pattern. The season ends, you have some time off, you work out, now you go back to training camp. And that just happened over and over in my life. So, when that was over, it was like, whoa, it was the weirdest feel. You're on your own. Like, who's going to, I'd never booked a flight before. I'd never booked a hotel room before. All that stuff had always been taken care of me, for me. So it's the same thing for you, right? For these guys now, it's, I guess, and I mean this as a compliment, maybe it's a strange compliment, but part of the reason most athletes are able to make it is that they've got that stubborn mentality that they can just do anything, right? That it's always going to be okay. That gets them in trouble sometimes. Some guys get in trouble financially because they think, with certain investment opportunities, they think it's always going to work out for them, because it has always worked out for them and somebody's always been there to take care of them. So right now, when something like this happens, I'm sure the teams are still in touch with them. They're probably talking to their trainers, probably working out virtually. The trainers are sending workout programs, so they're not all alone. But they're no longer, they've got to isolate themselves. They're no longer, going to that locker room every day and having everybody take care of everything for them. So it's a change. And I think you're going to see, it depends from player to player. I think some of the older guys, are going to, take stock of their lives a little bit more and think, we take things for granted. It's funny being on Survivor, even, although, they're not going to leave you out there to die or something like that. Or, there's always cameramen around. But for 7 weeks, you didn't have a phone or a computer. I slept in the dirt all the time. I ate coconut and rice, and that's all there was. There was no toilet paper, all those things. But again, you knew it was going to end. You knew this was a game you're playing. But still, it was like wow, you just take things for granted. So much of the time. I'm sure that's going on for all of us right now.
Yeah, and the whole idea of leaving the sport, I could relate, somewhat. I mean, obviously not quite the same, but I had been Kevin Allen of USA Today for 34 years. I was operating in a big time environment. The NHL, I traveled all the time. I went to big games, and not only just in hockey, but I covered NFL games, and I went to Olympic games, and one season during the NHL lockout, I covered the NBA playoffs, including the finals. I had been covered the World Series. I had been to Super Bowls, and I was living in sort of a dream environment. A lot of people would want my job, and then suddenly there's a merger of two companies, and Kevin Allen's out the door, and I'm no longer Kevin Allen of USA Today. And just what you were feeling when you walked out of Rogie Vachon's office, that's what I was feeling after the guy in the suit tells me you're being terminated, you're done. Right. And I go, well, wow, I'm just Kevin Allen. I'm not Kevin Allen of USA Today. And you know what? I can't go to the finals or the Super Bowl unless I buy a ticket.
Right.
I'm just like everybody else. So, and I think probably everybody sort of goes through that to a certain extent, no matter what you're doing. If you're a manager of a bank and you lose your job, your kind of ego is kind of wrapped up in that. And as a bank manager, you have a certain air of authority. You're a boss of people. You can pick up the phone and say, I'm bank manager of this, and because of that, will you do this for me? Well, then you no longer have that. So I think there's kind of an adjustment for everyone, but I think it's particularly rough on people who have had, let's call it privilege, because they've been in sort of higher profile positions. So I bet there's pretty much probably everybody who retires needs to lay on a couch and talk to a psychologist of some sort. But I wouldn't bet that athletes probably might need it more. I mean, I think there was a book that Gordy and Colleen Howe wrote years ago, but after the applause ends or something of that nature, what happens to you? And I'm sure that's the case. And I think to a certain extent this must be difficult for them now too. Is that part of their lives is the reinforcement they get from being in the kind of sports world, and now that's not there. And they're, like I said when I started the thing, they've got the same issues. They're trying to keep their parents safe. They're worried about their kids. Their kids want to go out and have a play date, and they got to tell them, no, we can't have kids over. We're sheltering in place, and it's just got to be strange if you're, you're not playing hockey and then,
I think after a while too, I don't know how you, I mean, it's fairly recent for you to just get done at USA Today. I know for me, after a while, it's strange way, I think I feel stronger now because you realize whatever job you have, that really doesn't define who you are, right? I mean, working at USA Today isn't really who Kevin Allen is. Kevin Allen's a great family man, the man with character, all that stuff. I mean, yes, the USA Today was a big part of your life for a long period of time, but you were a lot more than just USA Today. And I was a lot more like, I was very proud that I played in the National Hockey League for 11 years. I'm proud that I worked hard and sacrificed and did all the things I had to do to get there. But the farther away I get from it, I realize that's really not who I am. I mean, I'm that hardworking guy that got there, I hope. And I'm that character guy that got there, but that isn't all that I am playing in the National Hockey League. And that's not all you are being in USA Today, correct?
Yes, for sure. But that brings up a great point. Do you think it really helped you, and you're not doing it now, but you went really from being a player to being an agent, and it was really a quick transformation for you. Cool. And you were very successful at that. You had a lot of named players, and you had a good career, and you obviously left it. Tell everyone exactly why you left the agent business.
The agent business, you're right. I was fortunate, and just go back real quick. When I left playing, the thing I look back that I was fortunate about is we didn't make much money. I had a young family, and my salaries in the National Hockey League, I don't mind saying, my first year in the National Hockey League, I made $60,000. I had a $25,000 signing bonus. The most I ever made in the NHL was just around $300,000. So when I got done playing, there was no big nest egg there to sit around and say, okay, let's go to Hawaii or do whatever and lay around, do nothing. It was okay. It's time to get to work. And I think that really helped me, and that there really was no choice. I had to get to work. I had a family to take care of, and I had to be successful at that. So I think that in the end really helped me because there was no safety net. There was no, like I tell people, they ask, well, what's your plan B? And I say, well, finish plan A. That's what it was back then. So I was in the agent business for 22 years and had some great times. And a lot of the clients that I had, like any business, there's going to be some you get along with better than others, but there were some real great people, some great relationships, some great experiences, some tough experiences, things I learned a lot from. So it was fantastic. The biggest thing for me that as recruiting is such a big part of the agent business. And when I first started, I really said to myself, I'm not going to be one of these negative recruiters. I'm not going to go around saying bad things about everybody else. I wanted to just talk about what I was going to do and who I was. And that gave me the success I had. But as time went on, it became much more negative. It was much more competitive. Money was going up, many more agents in the business. And even the recruiting process for the young kids, like Brian Berard was the first overall pick in the draft. I met him when he was 16 years old. To get that next Brian Berard now, you'd have to get him when he's 13 or 14 years old. So all those things really changed. And I just said to myself, I'm not going to, compromise who I am to go do something else. Things like, again, I don't know if I told the story to you or not, if I ever did, but there's a young guy I hadn't really recruited a whole lot. And a call from a former player who was coaching a young kid in the Detroit area. And he was, I think, 13 or 14 at the time. He said, Tom, you really got to come and see him. He's a defenseman. You were a defenseman, all that. So I said, okay, I'll kind of break my own little rule, and I'll go out and I'll take a look at this 13 or 14-year-old boy. And I'll never forget, Eddie Olczyk's brother, Ricky Olczyk, was in the rink that day. And we knew each other pretty well. And he saw me sitting there, and he knew I was there to see these young kids. That's all. The only people are in the rink. He turns out, he used some colorful language, but looks at me like, what are you doing here? Because he knew that that's just not the way I wanted to do things. So it's funny as soon as he said that, I kind of looked at myself. I was like, what am I doing here? And I got up and I left, and I said goodbye to the father I was talking to. And that was pretty much, I knew that the agent business was over for me at that time, but it was a fantastic life doing it. But things have changed. So.
Yeah. It's interesting. You were mentioning the money, and you're really, you were not set for life. And, a lot of things that, probably a fan would never consider is, I've seen enough stories about the players who've ended up in financial ruin to know, kind of what happens. But, a bunch of things happen when you make a lot of money that, the average North American worker does not face. I don't have a bunch of people coming to me looking for money to get involved in investment schemes, but NHL players certainly do.
I just want to see if we get to this question. Go ahead.
Yeah, we are going to get to that question. Yeah. I'm leading up to that.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that I think, and no one's going to feel sympathy for him on this, but I think athletes live as if they're going to earn that amount of money forever.
Yes.
In other words, instead of when they get that $1 million deal, even though there's certainly not guaranteed there's going to be $1 million every year, especially when you're first starting out, you don't have any idea where your career is going. You live as if you're going to make $1 million for the rest of your life. So instead of just getting a normal house, you buy that house that's $600,000 or $700,000. And then maybe the economy goes bad and you're underwater on that house. You get traded. You're going to lose money on that house. So there are a lot of elements to it. I remember being at the NHL Players Association, the NHL, bring in all the rookies, and they put together seminars. And I was on a panel. And while I was waiting to do my panel, because I was talking with other members of the media about how to deal with the media. And I went to one, and your former client, Brian Berard, was on that panel. And he was talking about, some of the things. Brian lost a lot of money with bad investments, and he talked about that and how to avoid that. There were other former players that were there as well, talking about how easy it is to kind of go wrong and to end up like starting over when you didn't have that. But I believe it was Brian, it could have been one of the other panelists, that said that in order to be set for life, and he defined set for life as having $200,000 a year to live on for the rest of your life. He basically said you got to make more than $5 million plus. Now, when you look at the average salary, you think, well, a lot of guys do that. Well, a significant number do that. But most players, and I mean most, get in the NHL, they get a cup of coffee, maybe they get 1 year, it doesn't work out, and then suddenly in the minors, they're making minor league money, and they bounce around. Most of the pro hockey players, that's the route they end up.
Yep.
They end up in Europe. So, they don't come out of it. Do they come off well off? Well, if they're smart, yeah. But, they're not rich, not filthy rich. So that leads me to the question about, could they be hurt by this? And the answer, of course, and I'm going to let you kind of win, is not right away, because as we said before, players are paid during the regular season, and that was almost over, and they were paid for the rest of this regular season. But they would start losing money if suddenly next season is in danger.
Well, so two things there. You're totally correct. I hate admitting you're totally correct, right? You understand that?
I do understand that, and I accept that.
But so two things. We went through the lockout 04-05 where we lost the full season. And it wasn't just, I remember even for me as an agent, so you would normally I would bill the clients at halfway through the season, so around Christmas time, and then at the end of the season. So the season before the lockout, obviously I'd gotten paid from all my players, but then the following season was totally gone. So I wasn't able to bill clients at all. So there was no income there for me. And then we couldn't bill again until halfway through the next year. So it was like 20 months I had to go with no income from that business. That's just on the agent side. But from the player side, you're right. The players, the vast majority of the NHL players will be fine if the season just is canceled and they don't start again until next year. But again, as we discussed, are the revenues going to be the same? Are the players going to they'll still get 50-50, but how big is that piece of pie going to be that you're splitting up 50-50? The players, and one of our listeners here, Barry Shelley, mentioned it here too, the players that are really going to be affected are the minor league players, because they're not making a lot of money where they could have a big bankroll. So what are they going to do? And it's not like you said, it's not like now they can go over to Europe and play, which a lot of them did in the past.
Right.
Europe is shut down as well. So all these kids in the minors that probably haven't had a whole lot of money or a lot of time to save up money and are maybe only making $50,000 or $75,000 a year playing in the minors. Well, that's tough. They're going to have to go and get jobs, right? So, and they want to continue their careers, so they've got to train. So that's, it's almost going back to the old days of the NHL players in the 16 league where they didn't make any money. A lot of guys had jobs during the summer. So a lot of ramifications there that we really, and now that we're talking about, I didn't even think about the minor league guys until Barry brought it up. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens here down the road.
Yeah, and maybe you're saying to yourself, well, normal things, well, they can go out and get a job. Well, they can, because the unemployment's going to go up to 20%. They're not getting any jobs. Plus, they've got to figure out how to work out. And you had a nice video about how you're working out now, maintaining. Well, you got to have some creativity. No gyms are open. I know, and there's no ice to be found.
They can't go to the team facilities because there's nobody working there. So
that's right. Yeah. So you got to figure out how to do it. And, if you're living in an apartment, if you're single, or if you're, even if you got a home, you may not have a gym in it. Maybe you got some free weights. I don't know. But, most of them, I'm sure, if you're single, are going home and trying to figure out how to do there. So, if you were a player, how would you work out, Tom?
Well, not everybody has gas can Greshner like we do in the back here, and Wilson falls around. Nobody's that lucky. That's a fantastic question. I'm trying to think. So if this happened back when I was playing, I guess I had a small, like a gym set up in my house where I had a bike and one of those universal machines so you could get a workout. But you see a lot of players now, and I've really learned this. Actually, I saw a video. I think it was Max Domi, I believe it was doing an exercise. He was on his a medicine ball on his knees, so he's working his core.
Fantastic, by the way, that video.
Who, Max Domi? You see that?
Oh yeah,
yeah, that was incredible. So it isn't like the old days for us. It was just like a pound weights and ride the bike. These guys are working on their core, the inside of their strength, so much more now. So you would assume that they would have access to that kind of stuff so they could work out. But still, that's fine for 2, 3, 4 weeks. But man, you start going longer than that. If you're not able to, skate, and obviously they're not. The rinks are all closed. I mean, I go for my morning march at 4 a.m. and I even went by one of our local parks here, and it's all locked up. So they didn't want anybody even going near all the play sets and all that kinds of stuff. So there's really nowhere to go train for them. So again, they can run, they can ride the bike, they can do push-ups, but it's not the training that these guys are used to doing. They have personal trainers. They go to places where they're sports specific training locations where they train specifically for hockey. So, if those places are not available for as long as 3 months, which is probably the case, it's going to set guys back a long way. Again, they can still do things, but I don't think they're going to be like it's. And we talked about this before. Even if the season was to start at that point, they're not going to be nearly game ready for an extended period of time. It's not like now they show up at training camp and 2 or 3 days in they can play a game. You're looking at 2 or 3 weeks at least before they'd be ready to play a game.
Yeah, the only good thing is, of course, obviously a lot of them who have nagging injuries, they'll be healed up, which, the quality of the game, might be quite good. Maybe they'll be a little sloppy on the timing, but they're going to feel good, at least for a while until they get banged up a little bit. Before we wrap up, Tom, I thought about, maybe trying to have some fun here. So I'm going to give you some one-on-one confrontations. If you had to play one game.
Yes.
One game of importance, a Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final, a gold medal game in the Olympics, however you want to define it.
Yeah.
Okay, would you take Gordie Howe or Bobby Orr?
Whoa, that's a tough one. You sent me that. That was
possible.
Yeah, Bobby Orr. I got to go with Bobby Orr though. As much as I love Gordie Howe the way he played, Bobby Orr, I just thought it's hard to even say this when you're talking about Gordie Howe too, but I think Bobby Orr is maybe a little bit more of a difference maker than Gordie was, not by a whole lot. But he could just do everything in my mind.
Well, I might argue with it that he was a bigger difference maker. What I would say is that Bobby Orr changed the game. He was revolutionary. The game was different after he showed up because people saw what happens when you had a dynamic presence on the back end and could move the puck up. Saying all that, look, I'm going to admit it right up front. I'm from Detroit. I grew up as a Gordie Howe. I got to take Gordie, just because. This is a guy that occasionally played 40-some minutes a game when he was in his heyday. He could drop back. He used to rest by going back and playing a little defense now and then. And, of course, he was big and he was strong. And people look and they say, well, he was only 6 foot, 203. Yeah, but at that time, the game was played by guys who were 5'10", 165. So he looked like a giant, number one. And he was ruthless. He was tough. He was skilled. He could shoot with either hand. He sometimes would shift the stick in his other hand and then shoot left-handed, even though he was a right-hand shot. So he could do it all. And you got to remember, if Gordie was playing today, he probably would play at 220, and he would do things differently. He would train differently, but he'd still be like a dominant player. So I'm going to go with that. But I'd
love to argue with you too, but I can't even argue that.
In the same way, I can't argue Orr. I'd love to have Orr. He was just unbelievable. The most dynamic. We can say this. We'll agree on this.
Here's a news flash here. Joseph Vizera just spoke to Bobby Orr. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would say there. Because I've known you for a while and we've talked. There were times when you felt like you. Were playing like Orr. There was those moments. And I know if the late Herb Brooks was here, he'd say sometimes you thought you were Bobby Orr.
There's a couple of times at Herbie, I know I've told you this stuff where I would try to make a little move, like a little toe drag move to get around somebody, just for the fun of doing it. I would come back to the bench and he would rip me. He didn't even want me to think that I was ever allowed to do that. Even if I was all by myself, like just toe drag all by myself, he would never let me do it. So,
well, I want to do a couple more, but I'm going to testify right here that you were on the power play with Wayne Gretzky because I saw it. I covered it. I saw and it was on ESPN as well. There was the power play. You were right there on the point, and there was Wayne, who of course hadn't left this was the second power play unit. He hadn't come off the ice. But you were on a power play with Wayne Gretzky on the LA Kings.
There was a couple of times when Wayne was fantastic. I know I've told it so many times, but like in the heat of the game or something, if I was out there in the power play with him, he would look at me sometimes almost like, what are you doing out here? Like he didn't mean it in a derogatory way. It was never like that towards his teammates. But there was some funny moments sometimes where he looked, it's like, what the heck is Laidlaw doing out here?
All right, let's go. This is a tough one for you. Brian Leetch versus Chris Chelios.
Yeah.
Two different kinds of players, both of them dominant.
Totally. So again, I go back to the fact like Chelios to me was just there every game, competitive leader, fiery guy, had the offensive side to his game, especially early. That faded away as he got older. So I liked him. But just Brian Leetch to me, watching him play here, and of course we wore the same number. with the same team. So I'm going to go for him. I just think that his career, the big moments that he had, I don't think Chelios had as many big moments. Was he there constantly and for a longer period of time? Yes, he was. But I just think Leach had so many of those big moments. He brought won the Conn Smythe when they won the Stanley Cup here in 1994. So I'd have to go with Brian Leach.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Chelios, but I feel the same way as I did on the last one. I'd be thrilled to have either guy, and both of them are great. And I only say Chelios because when America came together to play international hockey, there was no doubt who the leader of that group was. Totally. And both of them were impact players. Obviously, Brian was not as mean as Chris Chelios was, not as ruthless, but he was much more dynamic than Chelios. Chelios was decent as an offensive player, above average. Knew what he was doing, but that wasn't what he was known for. He was known for a great deal. So I'm going to go with Chelios. I want to ask you a goalie question.
Yeah.
Patrick Roy or Marty Brodeur?
Oh man, that's almost an impossible one. Because I've been separating them by big moments, right? I talked about Bobby Orr being more of a game changer, about Brian Leach being more big moments. Both those guys have had just huge. Played such a huge role in their team's success for such a long period of time. I'm going to go with Marty Brodeur. I just think that he played on a team that was, I guess it benefited him some ways because they were such a good defensive team in New Jersey. But the flip side is too, sometimes he would only get like 15 shots on net, and that's hard for a goalie sometimes. So I just think they both had a swagger to him. I just love the way Marty played. If I was a defenseman, I would just love to have Marty as a goaltender. He seemed like he never got ruffled. If you made a mistake, hey, don't worry about it, guys. I'll either stop it, or if I don't stop it, we just got to keep on going here. So I'll go with Marty.
Yeah, I knew both of them pretty well. I've been to Marty Brodeur's house in the off season. I went to do a big story on him. I loved both guys. I just really like talking to both of them. They're just great guys. I'm going to go, just to keep the consistency of, you and I have been opposites every time, I'm going with Patrick Roy. And I'm going to list as my reason is just the arrogance and, the bravado and the cockiness. Think to Jeremy Roenick, chirping at him, and Patrick saying, I can't hear you because I got my Stanley Cup rings in my ears. And think about the time he went in before the big game in the Stanley Cup final, and Jacques Demers Canadiens, were playing, and said, if you give up, if you guys score 2 goals, we're going to win because I'm only going to give up 1. Just that arrogance. I loved all that. A final question: were you a comic book reader at all?
No comic books. No.
How about cartoons?
Cartoons, yeah. But remember, growing up in Canada on the farm there, we had 2 channels, right? And they're both black and white most of the time, so there wasn't a whole lot of cartoons. I do remember it was Quick Draw McGraw, I think, was one of my favorite cartoons.
Okay, well, Quick Draw McGraw or Bugs Bunny?
Oh, wow. I watched a lot of Bugs Bunny, too. Well, I'll tell you why I'm going to go with Quick Draw McGraw. So when I was how old I was, I had a little toy skunk. I don't know how I got a skunk, and it had it was all fur and everything, but it had a plastic face to it. For some reason, I poked the skunk's eye out right before I went to bed. I was not too happy about that. My parents tell the story that I was crying. I don't believe I ever cried, so that's probably not true. And they promised the next day if I went to bed that they'd go get me another toy skunk. They couldn't find another skunk, so they got me Quick Draw McGraw. So I became a Quick Draw McGraw fan at that point.
All right. Well, of course, I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go Bugs. But final thing, Clint Eastwood or John Wayne, 2 of your, as a Republican, those guys are both right wing, politically oriented guys, but they're also, kind of a man's man actor. Which one did you like best?
John Wayne. John Wayne, by far the most stubborn, played the most stubborn man that ever walked the face of the earth. Therefore, we love him. John Wayne.
Right. We'll leave it at that. You've heard it all. I'm Alan. He's Laidlaw. We're the Laidlaw and Allen Report. Join us again on Wednesday.
See you guys.